I feel this morning, after listening to each of our witnesses, I want to say amen to each of you, and also indicate that it's not only National Water Day, it's National Ag Day, and we won't have agriculture, we won't have food unless we have an abundant, clean water supply. And so there's a lot in common, and as the ranking Democrat on the Agriculture Committee, when we look at conservation efforts on privately owned land, which are managed through the Agriculture Committee, again, so much in common. And there's no question, I could go right down the line in terms of our national forests and what they mean in terms of jobs and outdoor recreation. Very concerned about the cuts in President Trump's budget as it relates to those things. I invite you all to Sleeping Bear Dunes in Northwest Michigan if you've not been there, to see God's country up north. And in fact, anywhere in Michigan is God's country, but absolutely beautiful places. And when we look at infrastructure, yeah, it's not only trails, it's not only all of the things that I support that you've been talking about, but we have large infrastructure projects like the Sioux Locks, where commerce comes through the Great Lakes, and we don't have right now, if the large lock, Pollock, shuts down or has a problem, there is no second lock that will allow the barges to come through to bring the minerals or to focus on the other areas. So infrastructure in many ways relates to what we're doing on public lands and private lands and water. And I don't think we have focused on that enough. I do want to talk about water specifically, as you can imagine, surrounded by water in Michigan. Mr. Chief, I completely agree with what you said about water being the lifeblood of our nation, and certainly in Michigan, the Great Lakes are part of our DNA and also part of the backbone of our economy. And I have to say, in the president's budget, and this is not for the hearing today, but the president completely zeroes out the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, zeroes out monies that we have been using through legislation developed on a bipartisan basis to protect our waters and our Great Lakes. And we intend to do everything possible to make sure that elimination of funding does not happen for a number of reasons. But along with the zeroing out of the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative is a 15% cut to the U.S. Geological Services, which also is critically important to the Great Lakes, as well as everything else that you talked about, Mr. Spears, in terms of access to minerals and so on. But when we look at the fact that President Trump's cut would be the lowest funding level for the USGS since fiscal year 2002, and yet the pressures, the demands, the challenges on our Great Lakes continue to grow. And I'm very concerned that what the U.S. Geological Service has done to protect the Great Lakes, developing toxins to kill sea lamprey, for instance, without harming other fish. And now we have the Asian carp, which is a huge challenge and threat to us in terms of fish and boating and quality of life and water. When we look at researching how to get the Great Lakes fish populations to thrive, and the fact that we've got over 75,000 jobs directly related to fishing in Michigan, and hundreds of thousands of jobs indirectly related to fishing, not counting boating and other activities outdoors, or algae blooms that threaten the drinking water of our 40 million people a day that get their water from the Great Lakes. And Senator Portman and I co-chair the bipartisan Great Lakes Task Force, and he certainly can speak to the fact that algae blooms have left 400,000 people in Toledo without drinking water. So all of that to say, and actually, Mr. Spears, you may assume I'm directing this to you, which I'm sure I assume you are concerned about the cuts, but actually I wanted to ask Mr. Treese, to you, just in terms of the importance of federal assistance and support as it relates to water projects. Obviously, in Colorado, it's not the Great Lakes, but certainly when we look at Western water managers and the importance of focusing on interstate waters and so on, I wonder if you might speak from your state's perspective about why it's important to be able to invest in protecting our water.
Thank you, Senator. Colorado covets the amount of water you have around the Great Lakes.
And you cannot have it. Unless you want to move to Michigan, which we would love to have you move to Michigan.
Thank you. I think the regional initiatives you mentioned, they are notable for their size, for their multi-state, multi-party involvement. The Chesapeake Bay Initiative in this area, and the Colorado River efforts, the multi-state efforts that are involved in the Colorado River, are all critical, and the federal government is an essential partner in those. The local communities, the states, and the federal government must be equal partners in those processes if they are going to be successful. To have the federal government unilaterally withdraw or significantly decrease their participation, financial and human resource participation, is to frankly doom those initiatives to failure.
And one of the things I wanted to mention as well on water infrastructure is that, again, with my agriculture hat on, rural water and sewer projects, which are so critical to my hometown of Clare and to communities across America, small towns across America, is zeroed out in the president's budget, which is also stunning to me. I mean, there seems to be a wholesale attack, Madam Chair, on water infrastructure, and I know we're going to want to work in a bipartisan basis to make sure that we have support for that infrastructure going forward in the budget. Thank you.